Hello. All right. I think it's working. Okay. So it's been a minute since I made a video. Life just got busy. But I wanted to come on here and talk about this topic of what should we really be eating. And part of it is that, whenever I start talking to someone that I'm potentially going to work with, and we start kind of looking at generally what they and their family are consuming, there are a lot of questions sometimes on what we should really be eating and how much of things we should be eating. And a lot of people oftentimes are kind of like looking for a straight meal plan, like something that they should just completely follow, and that's what they should be eating, and that's how they're going to lose weight. And those things obviously would work, but a big part of what I think is important of this is for people to inherently learn what really they should be eating most of the time. Our culture right now is pretty bad, I would say, at getting this information out accurately. I know, like in the medical field, we don't even spend anywhere near enough time with patients talking about these things. And not everyone has the luxury of being able to meet with a dietitian or a nutritionist. And so you get a lot of information from the internet, and the internet has a lot of mixed things right now. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what primarily should our diet look like in order to promote a healthy future. A health promoting diet is what I talk about a lot. And really the term that I'm going to use a lot is minimally processed foods. So our diet consistently 80% of the time should really have minimally processed foods. That you've heard the 80-20 rule before, I'm sure, and that's accurate. If you're really sticking to something 80% of the time, you're going to generally have a pretty health promoting diet, but it can be difficult for people to do 80% of the time. And what I talk about with minimally processed foods, so unfortunately, in when you go to the grocery store or whatever, there is a ton of options, and a lot of them are highly processed. Are highly processed foods inherently awful? No, you're never going to hear me say that you can't eat a certain thing. I'm definitely not one for complete restriction. However, what should your diet look like 80% of the time to be the most health promoting? It's going to be minimally processed foods. And what do I mean by that? So things that are close or as close as possible to how they naturally are formed. So things obviously like fruits, things like vegetables, nuts, seeds, lean meats, lean dairy, things like that. If those things are primarily making up what you eat 80% of the time, you're generally heading in the right direction. The biggest reason why avoiding more processed foods, especially when it comes to weight loss, one of the biggest reasons why is that they're unfortunately very delicious, but they are not very filling. And so it is very, very easy to overeat them. So if you're sitting and you're eating a bag of chips, you can eat the entire bag and not really be full, but you would have consumed several hundred calories at that point. So number one problem with them is that they're delicious. So it's number one, difficult to put down. Number two, they're not really filling at all, so you can eat a lot of it. And number three, they're really not typically filled with a lot of nutrients, and you're replacing, that. You're eating those things in place of another healthier choice, obviously. So generally speaking, it's not that you have to avoid these things all of the time, but if what you're going to have in the house is, some of this stuff, and you have a really hard time with not overeating these things, part of the problem is they're just made for you to eat a lot of them. They are made to taste delicious, and it is sometimes very difficult to restrict yourself with these things. And so it's very, very easy to overeat them. So that's definitely one of the main problems with this. It can be difficult to learn how to eat this way. So I grew up, my parents were immigrants. I was a first generation American. They worked a ton. And so I was eating a lot of microwavable foods, like a ton of microwavable foods. We did not often have fresh fruit in the house, fresh vegetables in the house. It just wasn't as readily available. And so I did not learn how to eat like this as a kid. And so as I was getting older and having a lot more struggles with my weight and with my health, I had to really start learning how to incorporate this into my diet. And it was a slower process. You know, if you are very used to eating out a lot, you have a lot of highly processed foods in your house, you are not cooking a lot of your meals at home, this has to be a slow process for you to be able to do this sustainably. If all of a sudden you kind of like try to wipe your refrigerator clean and this isn't something that you're used to doing, it's going to feel a lot harder for you. So my suggestion is, if you're looking at your diet, if you're really looking at what you eat and you're going to say, I am nowhere near this 80%, you know, of the time that I'm supposed to be eating minimally processed foods, I'm nowhere near that, then I want you to break that down into smaller goals. So if you find that a certain meal of the day is the biggest struggle, or a certain kind of thing is the struggle, or maybe you like have no idea where to start, I would just pick one thing to focus on. So if that's incorporating more vegetables into each of your meals, if that's cutting out and just not purchasing some of those highly processed foods that you have a really hard time not eating the entire bag of, just a small thing to start with and start working towards, because it can feel overwhelming. But the general goal is to start getting as close as possible to that 80% of what you're eating. And this does not have to be perfect. I think especially when you're in a plan for weight loss that's going to be long term, so if you have a significant amount of weight to lose and you're making a lot of these changes, you have to do this slowly, and you have to assume this is going to take you a while to consistently do well. And the idea is to be consistent. I would much rather have you have an off week or two and decide, I'm going to get back onto this now, than to have months of consistency and then drop off for 6 months. The idea is to try and keep coming back to this, keep getting better at it, keep incorporating new things. If there's something you historically don't like, try cooking it in a new way, try incorporating it in a different way. The idea is to experiment with more of these things so that you become more comfortable with them, and namely also so that your kids become more comfortable with them. If they are growing up eating these things or being around these things, they're going to be much more likely to have their diets consist 80% of the time of minimally processed foods. But if they were like me and they were not growing up that way, it is much harder to learn this as an adult and to start incorporating this as an adult. So I just wanted to touch on this topic a little bit and encourage you guys. I know sometimes that can feel hard to try and overhaul your whole diet, but there's a lot of information out there about specific things that you need to avoid, like avoid gluten or avoid dairy or avoid this or avoid that. And really, unless you truly physically feel unwell after those things or you have an allergy to it, there's not a reason to do that. There's ways to incorporate all these things into your diet in a balanced way. You don't have to avoid something specifically, and it is not going to destroy your health if that is in your diet. For the most part, one specific ingredient is not going to affect your overall health that much, especially because you're typically not eating these things in that much excess. So hopefully this is helpful. I want you guys, if you're watching this, comment how you feel, how closely you feel to that. You know, do you feel like close to 80% you're eating minimally processed foods, or do you feel like you're nowhere near it? Or what in what ways do you guys feel like there's one small thing that you can do in order to get a little bit closer to that this week? So let me know if you have any thoughts, and thanks for watching.